In this tutorial, you will learn how to draw this weaved curved octagonal rosette found on the ceiling of a mosque in Cairo. I will teach you how to construct a basic octagon grid using a compass and find the proportions of the overlapping circles. Then you will learn how to draw the circular arcs and interweave them to create the continuous loop effect on the design. I will also demonstrate how to outline the weaved pattern, along with a fun and easy painting style. This class comes with step-by-step visual instructions, making this pattern accessible to anyone interested in geometric art. Enjoy! So here we go. This is the beautiful Cairo ceiling curved rosette we're going to recreate with this simple construction. So we're going to need some paper. I've used both square paper or A4 card or watercolor paper. It's the same width and we really only are concerned with the shortest width. We need a ruler, a good compass that has the pen attachment and pencil attachment. Ideally, you want a good mechanical pencil that is precise and it has a good rubber at the back. You may use a separate thin zero eraser rubber as well if you have one. I like using one. And we're going to need a waterproof fine liner of some kind, or permanent pen that's thin enough to outline, and any colors that you like. To create this, we're first going to draw a square grid as a base, and then we're going to turn that into an octagonal base, and then we will be ready to find the correct proportions to draw these circles. Some of those circles appear in several different places in the design. So once we have those proportions, we're going to draw the bigger circle rosette, and then we're going to draw the smaller circles, the trickier ones. Then we're going to construct the frame by using the same proportions as these circles. This is where the radius and the compass come in really handy. And once we've done that, we will erase strategically some of the marks to give that illusion of a weave or a 3D idea. Even if you don't have that extra gap here with the shading, it will look 3D because of the weave. Once we've done that, we'll carefully outline each of the arcs in the correct places with a permanent marker. And then we can decorate it however. We can paint different parts of it. We can paint the ribbon. We can leave the ribbon blank. Any colors that we like, we can mix different colors in the different parts. And of course, whether or not we add some shading to create that extra 3D depth, again, that could be an option. We'll discuss those later in the decoration and finishing touches part. Let's go. Okay, let's start first by finding the center of the page so that we can find the horizontal line. We're going to work on A4 and find halfway down the page. It's about 29.75.8. I mark it at 14.8, or whatever your size might be slightly different. Take the page and mark the same distance on the other side. We're going to join this with a horizontal line. And the shorter side of the A4 is 21, so I mark it at 10.5 for our center. Now we're going to use a circle of 8 centimeters. That fits perfectly on an A4. Okay. The final version of this design will be only slightly wider because of adding that frame. So as long as you make sure your circle fits on your paper. Now we're going to find the vertical, the perpendicular line going down. So to do this, we're going to draw a couple of arcs from the intersections between the circle and the horizontal line. But we must extend that beyond halfway from the center. The reason for this is so that the arc is long enough to cross. So we're going to do this above and below, roughly above the center. Do the same with the same radius. The radius here is arbitrary, but it must be the same on both sides, top and bottom. Here we go. So this is where we know how to find our central line going vertically. So join these two intersections. It should go through the center. Here we go. Now these distances, the radius here is the same as that. We're going to go back to the 8 centimeter radius. You can either measure it with a ruler, or I actually advise measuring the current circle that we have using our compass. Okay, now we're going to draw half circles, or slightly over a half, going from all 4 intersections of our current circle with the axis that we've drawn. So just over half a circle, long enough for the corners to cross. And these will be the corners of an imaginary square that goes around the circle that we've drawn initially. And the last one. If the arcs are not long enough to cross, just go back and extend them. Okay, so we have now the basis of our square. What we need now is the 2 diagonals of that square. We're going to join the intersections at those corners of where the arcs cross from one to the other. And of course, going through the center again and extend. The same on the other side. Now where these diagonals, the new lines we just drew, where they cross the circle, this is another 4 points, again with the same radius of 8. We're going to draw another 4 half circles. And this time I just need to make sure they go inside the circle. We don't need to extend it beyond. We just need to make sure these cross here within the circle. So just make sure they are long enough to fill the space inside your circle. Okay, another diagonal. And the last one. This is what makes this design go from a square to an octagon. Now we have 8 equally spaced leaves. So what we're going to do next is use these 8 new smaller leaves. Where they intersect is going to be halfway between the ones we've already made. So we're going to draw straight lines from where the tops of the new small leaves crossed, from here to here, going through the center, and extend. Make sure you extend past here so that we want these lines to later on cross the frames as well. Okay, so let's do each opposing pair. So this one here, going through the center, again extend a bit. This one here, and the final one. Okay, so now we have our space cut with 8 lines in between each one. Right, we have now all the lines on the grid that we're ready to start constructing some circles. We're going to start with the bigger circles that go on the inner side of the design. Now, first we need to locate where the centers of the circles will go. And to do that, we need a line that will join, imagine this point here from the starting circle on the left that intersected the horizontal line. So imagine going west, and join that with the opposite top right corner of where these arcs cross. If you imagine that this is a square, we want the top right vertex of that square. So these 2 points, we're going to align them. You can draw a full line here if you like. You could do it with a dashed line, you could do it a full line. I don't want to have to delete that line later. All I'm interested in is where, not the vertical axis, but the one to the left of that is being crossed when that line crosses. Now this point shows us the radius of the circle that we want. The circle here is just to locate all the centers of the arcs that we are looking for. Make sure it goes through there and make a full circle. Now I'm going to start from the north line here, and I'm going to pre-puncture these to show you where we're going to go. So we're going to go here and every other line. So jump over the leaf, the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And there should be 8 in total. All of them start from in between the small leaves. Okay, so there they are. Now, the big circles that we need to draw now don't have the same radius as this. To find the new radius we want for all 8 of those circles, we want to look at the diagonals, see the 4 corners of that imaginary square. Where does that touch the original circle? If we puncture those 4 corners and measure the distance from each corner, look, it's actually smaller than we need, until it touches the original circle. Here, here, and so on. You can measure all 4. In fact, let's draw these 4 circles now, because we're going to need them as part of the frame later. So let's draw those circles. The circles that are tangent, and don't worry if they don't fully fit on the page, because we don't actually need that full circle. We just need to make sure the circle cuts through that leaf, the big leaf here at the corner. So we need to make sure it cuts through there. So just that is enough. So we can just do semicircles. One here, one here, and one more. So these are just for now, we're using them for the proportion that we need on the inside. Quite often in these patterns, proportions remain the same or alternate between the big circle and the space in between. There is another way you can check this radius. If you start from the edge of the big circle, and it should go to the two intersections of these two small leaves. That's the same measurement. Right, now let's construct the 8 bigger ribbons inside of the rosette using the pre-punctured points that we did earlier. So we want full circles here. And you should notice 2 things. The circle goes beyond those intersections. This is correct. And also the circle should be tangent to some of these lines that we've drawn. It should touch. It doesn't go all the way into the center, but it does go into the lines. So as I continue to do this, you will see more and more tangent where this circle, all the circles we're drawing here will be touching some of the lines. Some nearer lines, some further lines. Repeat all 8 circles here. Don't worry if there's a slight inaccuracy at this point, like mine here is slightly further out. It's okay, doesn't spoil the symmetry of the design or the idea behind it. And notice how when we cross these circles, the newly formed petals all lie on the axis in between, which is great. Now we need to draw the inner part of the same big circle, right? Because they're thick ribbons. So this is the outer edge. Now we need the inner edge of that. And that's quite a simple one. We just want the same points, but we want to go as far as, instead of touching this axis, we want it to touch the axis before, which is here. This is the narrowest you can go. If you go any further in, your circles will not cross and they will not form those tethered edges, right? So you make sure you don't go beyond this, okay? You can measure that by joining these 2 points across with a line and see exactly where it cuts, or you can just see where it touches. So now if I make a full circle, it should touch on the other side as well. That's close enough, so I'm going to continue. If you're not sure, make your radius slightly wider, because if you make it slightly wider, you're ensuring everything will cross. If they're a bit too wide at the end, once we start outlining with a permanent pen, like here they're not quite wide enough, but once we start outlining with a permanent pen, we can make it that little bit wider. Okay, so just repeat those 8 circles. And these are now done. Next, we need to locate where to put the small circles. These are trickier to find the centers of, and they are trickier to draw because the smaller the circle with the compass, the trickier. However, these 4 circles that we drew earlier are very helpful. And see, notice where our edge circles, the corner circles, cross each of the long petals. These are the points we need. And with a ruler, we're going to join each pair of points where these really big petals, the leaves, are crossing the corner circles. So here and here. Draw a line and extend. We're going to do this on all 4 sides. So now on that side here, I'm looking for this point and this point. Big petal, corner circle. Align these 2 and draw another line. This will be the inner line of those ribbons for the frame. Okay, so see how they're creating these points that cross here on these corner axes. Okay, so now at the top, there's the leaf, big leaf, corner circle, this one, and its opposite. At this point, you might want to rotate the paper to see it more clearly. This should also cross over here, which it did. And finally on the side, this is where these 2 arcs cross, and here as well. Here and here, and you could see that they should also cross these 2 corners here. Okay, now why did we do this? We did it because where these 4 lines of our frame cross the 2 original axes, that is here, 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 and here, this is where the center of the smaller circle goes, and the smaller circle will come out a bit more and give it that extra thickness. However, we have the other 4, which we can't recreate this easily. So to make it simpler, we're going to draw a circle that goes through those 4 points of the frame, and that circle is just to show us where the centers of the small circles go. Once we know where all the centers go, there you go, see, perfect, here, 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 and here. But now we know where all 8 circles are going to go around. Just as before, I'm going to pre-puncture this. So, starting at the top, north, and this is where this line goes. Now, so we don't get confused, we're just going to follow this new circle we did, and we're doing it at the top of each of the big circles. Okay, so there's no big circle here. We skip this, we go to the next, at the top of the big circle. So just here, and follow the circle all the way around. Here, here we already did. Here, and here. We're done with those circles. Now let's measure how big the circles are. Now these are much smaller. Okay, so make sure your pencil and your pin are quite well aligned. And if I put the pin on the center, I want this to perfectly match with the inner circle of our big curves. This one here, this one here, and so on. They will vary slightly, but I'm going to go with that. Again, we can adjust later. So this is the circle. So at the top of each of the previous ones, and just follow the punctures that we've just created. Okay, mine are slightly too big in some places, a bit far away in other places. Like I said, once we outline this with a thicker pen and weave it all, it will be much neater. That's fine, it's always a work in progress. So we do all 8 at the top of the existing 8 bigger circles. And now, very importantly, with the same radius, we're going to measure out 4 other ones in the corners. That will help us with the frame later. It measures the same width of the ribbons. So we need them to be in those 4 corners we created when we did these 4 lines. Okay, so same distance. So that distance needs to be the same as here. Okay, again, where these 3 lines cross, same radius. And this is helping with the frame. So it's nice when every step has a different function, more than one function. And here we go. This is the outer width of the small circles. Now we need the inner width of the small circles, which is much harder to draw. And you may have guessed it, we need to ensure that that now is reduced until it gets to just to touch the top, the outer edge of that circle. Now this is much harder to draw, and quite often this can come out just like this because one side is top heavy, it can come out of the page and so on. Either make sure that you might want to be putting some weight on where the sharp pin is so it doesn't jump out, and keep your compass nice and straight, because sometimes the weight, if it leans too much, it can make it jump out. Now, I have a good compass. Some compasses are trickier to do this. So I'm going to show you something that always works if this technique is too hard. So sometimes I will just put the pin down, and instead of rotating the compass, you can just rotate the paper. Because at this point, the weight, the control is in the same place. That's not moving. All you have to do is turn your paper around. So it's up to you how you do it. Try both ways, see what works. This may work, but if it doesn't, just rotate your paper and make sure you put weight enough on the sharp pin. The most important thing is that the sharp pin doesn't move position, doesn't jump out of its little hole. So make sure to puncture it. Feel free to puncture it. Don't worry that the paper gets punctured. That's what it's there for. And this is another reason why I really like thick card paper to construct on. We need to repeat the same in the 4 corners. Again, for the same reason, we need to be able to align that distance here with those. That will help us build the frame to be the exact same width as what we need everything else to be. And there we have that part done. Now, because we constructed everything else with the same radius, That's always a good technique. Use up all the same radius all at once, even if you don't need some aspects immediately. We didn't need these immediately as part of the design, but now we have everything we need to build the frame around it in the exact correct place. So what we want now is to align the outer intersections of those circles. See, if you only have one in the middle, you don't know how to align it. When we have three, or at least two, we can make a definitive straight line. So we're aligning those three intersections of the vertical lines with the outer corner circles. I'm going to extend this a little. So this is the outer edge. I'm going to rotate here so I can see better. And this is my preferred method. Again, 3 vertical lines. Just look at the most southern part of those 3 circles. It should go through the bottom of the middle one if you're not sure. And that is the outermost edge of our complete design. And I'm going to just rotate and repeat the other 2. Okay, so this is the outer edge, and of course the inner edge of the frame. So we need to ignore those lines we already have there. They were just part of something else. We need the thickness to match the thickness of the circle. So this is the width. This is why we drew the smaller circles. So now we do exactly the same, aligning the bottom of the 3 smaller circles at their intersections with the vertical 3 lines. This is that thickness. This will blend seamlessly with the circle and its radius. Rotate and repeat 3 more times. Now, those 4 parts of the frame are perfectly finished, but if you remember, this looks like an octagon, so we need 4 more ribbons to create here diagonally. And for this, we don't need any circles, luckily. We just need the intersections of those middle lines that we created all the way back at the start. Where they cross those frames, both the inner and the outer edge of that, this is what we need. So it's these in between diagonal axes that we have. Okay, so I'll start at the top right, where one of those joins one of those. You will see that that will go right past the circle. It goes right on top of this circle, just like this. And you don't need to extend here because we have the final version. I'm going to do the one here on the bottom, so where these 2 lines cross the outer edge. And you will see how that sits at the bottom of the diagonal circle. That should always be the case with these. And 2 more. And final step now is to do the same on the inner corner of this, so where the same axes cross the inner edge of the frame we've already created, so from here to here, and it will go right past the smaller circle. So it's parallel to what we already drew. Now we just go in a bit further in and past the smaller circle. Okay, so we have the outer edge. We're moving up to this point and past the inner circle. See? Repeat 2 more times. And that is it. Notice in some places I didn't extend, in some I did. It doesn't matter later, we can add or take away some of these. But this is now fully created, fully constructed. Now, before we need to outline the final design, ready for decoration, we must first weave the ribbons. So what I'm going to do is delete parts of these circles that we don't want to create that overlap. When you delete part of the lines, it creates that illusion of weave. Okay, so what I'm going to do is do one aspect at a time and rotate. So at the top here of that circle, what we want is this circle to blend in with that horizontal part on the right of it. In other words, we don't want the edge of the circle here. We want this straight line to join into the circle. And then that circle goes all the way in until it reaches the lower arc, that big arc. So can you see it? It starts from here, it curves down, and it stops because we do want that to hide behind this ribbon. So I'm going to do this part for all 8. I'm going to rotate and do the same thing. So I want this part of the circle to go away because I want all of this free. until it reaches this large arc underneath. Rotate again. Okay, so this part is now done. This is going in and it stops. Since we wanted to stop behind this arc here, what we're going to do now is the one that comes out underneath. So this part goes on top, but this bit of the small circle, we want that to come from under this horizontal line. So we want this to appear from under here and go on top of that bigger circle, going down and stop here. So we want it to come from under this line. So anything from under this line goes away. We get rid of this arc here of the larger circle because that is now going on top. And then it's also going on top of these two. So we delete these two. So notice it starts from under here. Do not delete that arc because that's what separates this ribbon from that ribbon. If you delete this arc, it will look like just one full circle again, but we want to split it. So that was there. Now we're starting from below, curve it this way, and we stop where we see this one. So we're not going to do any more. So we're just going to recreate this little curve on all the others. Okay, again, it comes from under that line. Delete this way, and stop. There, you have that curve uninterrupted. And repeat all the others. Okay, this part is now also done. So this goes over here, this goes from under and over here, and it stops at this curve. So now we want that curve to go over the one we just did. This one stops here and we want it to skip from underneath. So this here needs to go because that curve goes down to here. Now these join here together, but we don't need to delete these at this point. We just join them here because here it's not a weave, they're just one continuous ribbon. So we just need to delete this bit here. Okay, so if we rotate this, that goes under, stops. So we delete this bit here. Okay, all the curves now are weaved correctly. They meet all the way up to here and go back up again. Okay, the only thing left now to weave is the actual frame. So we have the 4 sides of the square, but then we have those shorter segments of the octagon. Okay, so what we want to do is, if I start at the top left, we want one open ribbon all the way until we meet that circle. So this here, this whole thing here, needs to be empty. Okay, so that's one ribbon. So we didn't need this part. Okay, so all the way there. Then of course it tucks under here, but this one, what happens here is that circle that we started with goes up to here and stops, but it joins together with this. So this is one continuous ribbon here, even though it goes around the corner. You could improvise here. It can be in a slightly different way. You can even tuck that under that and have several different ones. But I prefer only 2 at any one intersection. So this one bends down on the same level, but this one underneath continues to the corner. So from under here to the end is another single ribbon. So a full ribbon there, then that circular one goes on top and it curves, and then this one goes underneath. I'm going to repeat on all 4 sides before worrying about the diagonals of the octagon. Okay, the 4 corners are correct. Now for these diagonals, I'm going to start at the top left. We want this ribbon here to come from under that long one. So we want it to come from under that and join in with that circle that we've already done. That's kind of basically the one at the start. And then this one here, it's already joined with that one on the corner. So rotate, let's do it again. This is it. This is all the ribbons weaved. So the next step is the most crucial because we have to outline all this correctly with a permanent marker. Okay, let's outline nice and carefully. If we make a mistake, don't panic. I'll show you some ways how we can disguise it. But I'm using a waterproof fine liner, thin one. It's okay if you go for a thicker one. It suits the design anyway. And thicker lines are easier to merge together. But I'm using this one before decoration. Then I can always add extra lines afterwards. Now, this will be tricky. And I'm thinking that we start with the trickiest part of the smallest circles, but also they're full circles, so we can outline the entire circle without having to lift off. So this is another reason why I want to start with. So make sure once you've changed your pen, you remeasure your radius in a few different places. Okay, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm going to attempt to do it fully like this. But again, if this doesn't work for you, because the compass is wobbly, then try my strategy with rotating the paper instead. Phew, done. Now these are so cute though, once they pop out so nicely. We may have to do this one more time if we decide then to add metallics later on, but these are out of the way for now. Now the rest of all the arcs, all of them are partial. So we have to be careful not to get carried away and create a full circle, because then the weaving has gone. Okay, so I'm going to measure the next biggest radius, so the outer edge of the small circles. And again, you can use a few different places to make sure it reaches as far as you want it to. Okay, I'm going to go at the bottom with 2 arcs and then repeat them in 8 places by rotating the paper. So the perspective we're looking at is the same. So there are 2 arcs for this circle. So I'm going to put my point there. It goes from there, from where that line is, into the middle where the vertical axis is, and stop. It looks as if we can continue, but now the next part will be to continue the other arc, which is part of a different circle with a different center. In fact, let's do this one 8 more times because it's exactly the same. I love this part. It's where the design is starting to look like something is actually shaping up, taking part. Now, because I prefer working that way, I'm going to move to the top one. Now we want this arc that comes from under the big ribbon on the left and it goes again to the top, to the center. So it's very similar, slightly longer. Yeah, this is what we're after. And we stop because that ribbon will be part of a straight line. Rotate. Okay, little circles are done. Now we're going to do the bigger circles, which are slightly easier to do, again, because they are larger. Let's do the inner circles because they're the next in size. So it should go from here to perfectly match this point here. So you can just dab down and see where it lands. Okay, I've measured mine. I'm going to go for it. Now there are 2 parts to this. The first part is to start from where the 2 circles cross on this axis here and stop at the first ribbon and then skip. And then for the rest of the arc behind here, we go all the way down to the bottom of where we anticipate that to match the next one. I think mine should be a bit thicker because that will come a bit short here, but that's the point. And then we wanted that to perfectly blend with that. This is what it's about, the arcs merging in and splitting off. So let's rotate and do it. And don't worry if there's a little bit of a gap. Okay, from roughly where we see the 2 circles touching on the axis, stop under that ribbon. So the flower petals now are going to help us with this. Jump over, continue, and stop where we anticipate that to merge the next one. Okay, and now we're going to do the outer circles. So measure such that the radius will touch the lower end of these small circles, because this is where they're merging. And there's a few extra jumps to consider here. So first we will start from where these meet here and stop from under. So we're trying to replicate, obviously that's one ribbon, so they'll be parallel. Jump over here and pick up from the middle of that line and stop where you touch the circle at the bottom, because then we jump over the small circle now and go until that will cross the next circle here. Okay, so under that ribbon, jump over here, jump under, and then continue. Okay, let's do it one more time. So from that intersection here to the ribbon, first ribbon, jump over, take off there, and to the bottom of the circle, and then from the side of that circle, 2, make sure you stop where you anticipate the next circle to reach, which is why we're looking at the underlying arcs. Okay, here you go. Now there's a few ways we can fix this issue here if you have the same one. It's quite a common one. We can repeat the ribbons with a thicker pen. It's exactly the same outline, and the thicker pen will join in together. We could do this, or later when we're ready to decorate, or after we've painted when you want to tidy up the corners. Another way though, if it bothers you right now, is just manually just join in a little triangle in between each of those, just to finish them off. Okay, and now we have just a few straight lines to add, and those lines are just to finish off the frame. So I'm going to concentrate on that inner corner, the one that brushes underneath the small circle. So we need to start from this corner here, where the 2 inner lines crossed. Stop here, so that's a good idea to put dots on where you want to lift off your pen. Then we pick up again from over that corner ribbon. We go all the way into the circle, because that will be going over the circle. And then on the other side, of course, we come under the circle, and that goes all the way to the inner corner. So there are 3 segments with this. Let's align this and do it carefully. Okay, so from here to the first diagonal ribbon, over the ribbon, to the middle of that circle. My ruler seems a bit bumpy, because now this is blending in this ribbon. Okay, and then on the other side is just one continuous ribbon from here to there. Okay, now I'm going to repeat the 4 sides before worrying about the diagonals, because remember the frame, these 4 are slightly different. Now for the diagonals, we just have 2 segments, one that goes from the corner to the bottom of the circle, and then one that goes from the other one and joins. Nothing crosses here, so just from this corner, bottom of the circle, and then from the other side of the circle to this corner, just like this. Repeat 3 more times. Okay, now we have the outer edges. Now the outer edge of the full square is 4 lines, so very easy. We don't have to think about those because they just don't interrupt anywhere. So just from corner to corner, making sure to blend in with that circle at the bottom. Perfect. And repeat 3 more times. Okay, and now the diagonals. So the diagonals go from under on the left, from under the ribbon on the left, but it goes all the way to the corner, the outer corner on the right. So it gives the illusion that that will go on top of this one here. So just like this. So it's one straight line, but it starts from under here, but it goes to the edge. And it blends with the circle on the bottom as before. Okay, so now that looks like it comes from under here, goes there, and then this one looks like it's separate, it comes from under here. Okay, 3 more of those lines. There we have it, fully constructed, fully completed, outlined, weaved correctly. Now all we need to do is rub off those marks, the pencil marks, and it's ready to paint. Okay, let's paint. Now you could do so much with this, lots of different varieties of how you'd like this. Because I've already made a couple of variations where my focus was on the ribbons, with this one I'd like to focus on the spaces in between, the negative spaces. And I see this amazing looking beautiful flower in the middle, so I've used a few different of my favorite colors, and then I'm going to just blend them randomly together. So right now I've got the paint mixed quite watery, but I'm not putting water on the paper because I still want that good amount of pigment. And I'm just spreading this completely randomly. And just be careful at the edges. And eventually all colours will blend, and we can then just drop a few extra accents here and there. I do want to try and keep the ribbon white. Of course, if that doesn't work out, it will be very easy to fix by just adding colour. Okay, so I'm going to put some light blue now. See how watery I've kept it. I usually do like to paint on wet paper, but I don't think this needs it. And also I want to see how the paint just mixes up together on its own. Still plenty of water there. Mixed up a bit of purple, but this will actually create its own purple. And then I like to sort of drop a colour into a colour and see how they blend. Very nice. You can go with a thick brush here, just see how the water carries the colour. But it's not spreading it beyond where you need it to be, so it gives that extra little bit of control. I'm going to drop a few darker bits. Oh, I like how abstract this is becoming. We are, of course, going to tidy up the edges a bit more carefully soon. But for now, just adding accents here and there, creating that unexpected effect. Quite abstract. To go with a bit of dark blue, even though that's very watery. Let's see if I can define some of the edges. See how this blue is blooming into the pink. Amazing. I love that. Now here, you might want to go with a thinner brush. See how you feel, unless yours is well pointed. A bit unpredictable here. But I would just go for it. If you're not happy with it, just take a little bit of tissue paper and you can pick up some of the pigment and then layer on some more. I think I'm happy with the amount of pigment. I don't want to lift any off just yet. Also, you must be very careful when you pick up some pigment off the page that it doesn't actually smudge it beyond where you are trying to paint. Now, I don't want it to be too mixed up. I do want distinct colors with this. So I am trying to achieve that. So now just carefully with the sharp edge of the brush, you need to tidy those up. Now you don't have to add any more colour. At this point, there is already a lot of pigment on there. So you can even do it with just a clean brush and just transport the colour to the edges. You can either blend it or let it create those blooms. I prefer the blooms. So once I've spread this, and if it gets a bit too blended, what I'm going to do is add a few extra blobs of colour here and there. So this part here is quite pink, so I'm going to just add a little blue on the edge. Yeah. I like every other one. Some are blended more and some are very nice and distinct. I enjoy seeing both types. So this one's blending in. So don't worry about the edges. I think I'm definitely going to re-outline this. I always do. I feel it's an important finishing touch in geometric art to redo the outline. So whether we redo it in black again, slightly thicker black, or the same, or a metallic colour. I'm not yet decided whether to put the metallic right next to the paint or in between the black and the paint. If you leave black and then gold or silver on the other side, that black will create, first it will create a nice crisp edge which emphasizes the geometry, but it will also create depth because the black in between the light metallic and the paint, it will give it almost like a 3D depth effect. Okay, so the distinct colors here aren't as distinct in some places, but it's important to spread this to the edges before it's completely set, because the edges have the least amount of water and paint, so they will dry the quickest. So now I'm quite happy with the amount of paint on the edges, or almost. Once you're happy with your edges, and also don't worry if it spills over slightly, because remember we can actually make those ribbons slightly go inwards. So now, just try not to add too much water, just a little bit of pigment, and literally drop a few random blooms here and there. Somewhere there's already that colour, somewhere there's a different colour, somewhere it's already trying to come through from underneath. Just make sure it doesn't spill off. So see how my paper will curl up a bit for a while. Even though this is, so I'm using the smooth kind of watercolor paper, which isn't amazing with a huge amount of water, which is why I didn't want to do wet or matte in this case. But still, there will be the odd puddle. Here I see a puddle I don't want it to spill out. So I'm going to make sure it dries this way. The other thing I might do is just dab this carefully and just wash off some of that paint. It lifts off some of the paint. See? Okay, this might blend it a bit too much as well. But I'm going to now add, I think, some blues. Distinct looking blues I want. Just here and there. So some of them, they just have their own character, don't they? I just like that. Let's do a bit more blue. Not much of the light blue has remained at this point. Maybe you can try and emphasize the light blue a little bit more. It's peeking through in places very faintly, very gently. This is the one. See if we can maybe strengthen it in places. But I like that kind of painting. It's literally dabbing paint onto each other and just see what happens. Yeah, very nice. That side is a bit darker, isn't it? Yeah, I think there's a good distribution of colour now. Now what I like to do is, once it's dry, or even almost dry or fully dry, with a very thin brush, just with water, you can go over these edges again. And you just fill up the gaps, just like this, if you notice the old gap. Because the water will contract forwards, inwards, and you might notice a few more white patches than we see now. Okay, I'm going to let this dry before I do anything extra with it. Now what I'm going to do is focus on the pinks, just on those small areas, because I don't feel they're big enough to create a variety of colours in there. I'm going to go with a small brush, already pre-mixed colour, just use up the colour that you have. Drop a little bit more here in the corner. And repeat. On the sides now, I'm going to go with the blues. I'll start with the lightest blue. And see, supplement it with some of the other blues, I think. With these, I'm going to go kind of blue and purple. Some more of a gradient here. Okay, and now in the little circles, I think I'm going to go for nice bright pink. So here is the final product, all dry and beautiful. You can see the texture of these paints that we did together in the middle, and then the gradients came through really well, slight variations of pigment. And as you could see, the only thing I added was to put some fairly thick silver pen on either side of the black. That tidied up the edges, so I didn't have to worry about finalizing the edges, and I thought that that made it pop enough so that the white stood out without needing extra color. I think the contrast between the white ribbon and the colorful center really works. As you could see from my previous variation, I made the weave all golden, and then the spaces added here, where here they're flat and weaved. Here I double shaded them in a way to create the 3D effect. So it's almost like a raised beveled edge for the weave itself. But that gave a good separation between the gold and the colors. Otherwise, I think there wouldn't have been space in between, and I felt like it needed a contrast. Thank you so much again for joining me on yet another geometric art course where I'm teaching you an actual pattern from an architectural building, a real place in the world. As soon as I saw this pattern, I had to analyze it and share it with you. So I really hope you've enjoyed it. I cannot wait to see what you created. I get so inspired and proud and joyful seeing anyone else's creations. So please share with me and tag me on Instagram so I can share and admire and enjoy your work for everyone to see. And I hope to see you in my next course.